He was a man who had everything: money, fame, power, and the world at his feet. Yet, on the night before his wedding, the night when love should have triumphed over every doubt, fear crept into his heart. Ethan Blake, the young millionaire everyone admired, walked away from the woman who loved him more than life itself. No one knew why. No one dared to ask. But when the sun rose the next morning, the church stood silent, the guests confused, and the bride, Lila, was left alone, still wearing the dress that had taken months to prepare, her tears staining the silk-like drops of shattered dreams. Lila sat there for hours, unable to move, unable to breathe. She couldn't understand why he had left. They had promised each other forever, shared dreams under starlit skies, and planned a life that seemed perfect. But perfection is a fragile illusion, and Ethan's silence broke it beyond repair. When she finally walked out of that church, the whispers followed her like shadows. Some pitied her, some mocked her, but most simply forgot. The world moved on, but her heart did not. For 7 long years, she carried the pain of that day like a scar no one could see. She rebuilt her life, piece by piece, though every step was heavy. She found work as a teacher in a small town far from the city lights that once held her memories. Her laughter faded into gentleness, her eyes learned to hide what her soul still remembered. She told herself she had forgiven him, but deep down, she hadn't. How could she? He had left her with no reason, no closure, just silence. Meanwhile, Ethan disappeared from the spotlight. His empire continued to thrive, his name still appeared in magazines, but he avoided the cameras, the parties, the people. His mansion grew colder with every passing year, its emptiness echoing with the ghost of a name he never spoke aloud. He had left Lila not out of pride or betrayal, but because he believed she deserved better than a man haunted by his own secrets. A week before their wedding, his doctor had told him something that shattered his world. He had a rare heart condition that could take his life at any moment. He was terrified not of dying, but of leaving her to grieve him. So he made the cruelest choice he could think of. He left her first. He thought distance would protect her. He thought pain would fade. But love doesn't obey logic. It lingers like the scent of rain on the earth, faint, stubborn, eternal. He watched her from afar sometimes, quietly donating to the school she worked at, ensuring she had what she needed. He read about her in local papers when she organized charity events or taught underprivileged children. She had built a life out of ruins, and he admired her strength even as it tore him apart. 7 years passed before fate decided they had run long enough. It was a cold autumn evening when Ethan returned to the city where it all began. He had recovered, miraculously. A new treatment had saved his heart, and with every beat, one truth grew louder: he still loved her. But love after abandonment is a fragile thing. He knew he couldn't simply appear at her door and expect forgiveness. He didn't even know if she would want to see him. Yet something inside him, a voice that sounded like hope, whispered that he had to try. He found her at a charity gala, standing beneath the warm glow of chandeliers, her laughter softer but real. She looked even more beautiful than he remembered, not because of her dress or jewels, but because of her peace. She carried herself with quiet dignity, like someone who had learned how to live after breaking. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. Time seemed to fold back on itself. Every regret, every sleepless night, every unanswered question burned in his chest. When she turned and saw him, the world stilled. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The crowd around them faded into silence. Her eyes widened, not in anger, but in disbelief. He could see the storm behind them, the pain, the memories, the love she'd tried so hard to bury. Finally, she whispered, "Why?" Her voice trembled, fragile but strong enough to pierce his soul. Ethan stepped closer, his hands shaking. "Because I was dying," he said softly. "And I couldn't let you build a life around a man who might not survive the year." His voice cracked, and he took a trembling breath. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I disappeared, you'd move on and find happiness without me. But I was wrong. I didn't protect you. I destroyed both of us." Tears filled her eyes, falling silently. "You left me without a word, Ethan. You let me believe I wasn't enough." He nodded, tears of his own glistening. "You were everything. That's why I left. Because loving you was the only thing I did right, and I didn't want that love to end in grief." Lila turned away, her heart torn between fury and tenderness. For 7 years she had dreamed of this moment, of seeing him again, of hearing the reason, but reality was more complicated than her fantasies. She wanted to scream, to forgive, to walk away, all at once. "You should have trusted me," she whispered. "I would have stayed. I would have chosen the pain if it meant one more day with you." Ethan's voice was barely audible. "I know, and I've lived every day wishing I had believed that." The music in the hall swelled softly, the violins echoing the ache between them. People around them began to notice, whispers rising like wind. But neither cared. They were caught in a bubble of memory and emotion, standing on the thin line between the past and the present. Ethan reached for her hand, hesitating, afraid she would pull away. But she didn't. Her fingers trembled, then settled against his. It felt like coming home. "Do you still love me?" he asked, his voice breaking. Lila looked at him through tears. "Love doesn't just disappear, Ethan. It changes, it hides, but it never really dies." He closed his eyes, overwhelmed. "Then let me spend the rest of my life making up for what I did." For a long moment, she didn't answer. The pain of 7 years weighed between them, too heavy for words. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen before: humility, regret, and a love that had endured. Maybe time had broken them both, but it had also taught them what love truly meant. It wasn't about perfection or promises, it was about forgiveness. That night, they talked for hours. They walked through the quiet streets, remembering who they used to be. He told her about the surgeries, the recovery, the emptiness that followed. She told him about the nights she cried alone, the mornings she forced herself to smile for her students. They shared the pain like two halves of the same wound, finally healing because they faced it together. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, cautiously, they began to see each other again, not as they once were, but as two people learning to love with scars. Lila didn't trust easily. Ethan didn't push. He showed up at the school sometimes, helping with projects, donating books, planting flowers in the garden she loved. He didn't try to impress her with money or grand gestures. Instead, he showed her consistency, the quiet kind of love that stays even when it hurts. And one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he knelt before her again. Not in a grand hall, not in front of hundreds, but in the small courtyard behind her school, surrounded by children's laughter. "I know I don't deserve a second chance," he said, his voice shaking. "But I promise, if you let me, I'll never let fear steal our tomorrow again." Lila's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Then she whispered, "You don't need to promise anything, Ethan. Just stay." He smiled through tears, taking her hand. "Always." And this time, he did. The years that followed were quieter but more meaningful. They didn't chase perfection. They cherished presence. Sometimes they still argued. Sometimes the memories hurt, but love became something deeper, steadier. He learned to slow down, to live beyond his fortune. She learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about freeing herself from the past. Together, they built something unbreakable, not because it was flawless, but because it had survived the storm. Every anniversary, Ethan would hold her close and whisper, "Thank you for waiting long enough to find me again." And she would smile, resting her head against his chest, listening to the heart that had once been too fragile to risk. "I didn't wait," she'd say softly. "I just never stopped believing." In the end, the world remembered him as a man of wealth and power, but those who knew them knew a deeper truth, that his greatest fortune wasn't in his empire, but in the woman who forgave him when she had every reason not to. Their love became a story whispered among the townspeople, a reminder that sometimes life breaks us apart only to bring us back stronger, wiser, truer. And on quiet nights, when the stars filled the sky like the night they first met, Lila would look up and think of how strange and beautiful love can be. How it survives betrayal, silence, even years of absence. How it can begin again, tenderly, bravely, against all odds. She would glance at Ethan beside her, reading by the firelight, and smile through tears. Because the man who once abandoned her on the eve of their wedding had returned not to claim her, but to love her with the patience of someone who finally understood what love really meant. It wasn't the fairy tale they once dreamed of. It was better, real, imperfect, and eternal. And as they grew old together, hand in hand, Their story became a quiet testament that even broken hearts can find their way home, and that the love we lose is never truly gone. It just waits, until we're ready to believe in it again.